Well, greetings to you. Just another update on Ukraine, just to bring up to speed. And I'm sorry I have to do these things because really, in a free society, you should be able to get mainstream media and analysis from state broadcasting, the BBC, so on and so forth. But sadly, that isn't available to you, and nor is any Russia Today programmes allowed to be broadcast to you. They've stopped that, so you can't listen to speeches from the Russian president, so you don't know where he's coming from, so you're only getting one side of the story, as often you do in warfare. And I've said many times, nobody wins wars. They're all a waste of time and young lives and money, but there we are. We are where we are. War is a very bad thing. And this war in Ukraine is particularly stupid, criminal and unnecessary, because there was peace on the table 14 months ago. There could have been a settlement. It was perfectly all right. There was a settlement there for the asking. Boris flew out there to jigger it up at the behest of Washington, for whom he seems to work, and the CIA and the Washington neocons and the industrial military complex, which really has been getting into unnecessary criminal wars now since 1945. Great pity, our once allies. So this is the problem that we have. Now, what's the up-to-date situation? Well, the military situation, as I foretold, was that Bakhmut would fall, and it's fallen. I also foretold in the last video I did that the Ukrainian army counterattack would go nowhere, because the Russians outnumber the Ukrainian army now something like 6-1, and it's also 6-1 in artillery pieces, ammunition, and everything else. So there was no chance, as I told you 2 weeks, I think it was ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, there was no chance of the counteroffensive going anywhere at all. So it's ground to a halt, and I suspect the Ukrainian army has lost another 30 or 40,000 men in this futile advance. The Russians are just dug in. A few other things have happened, and then, of course, we saw this failed coup, this slightly comic turn game, which completely failed and petered out in under 24 hours. So that didn't go anywhere because there's no support for it. And of course, the press are trying to tell you one thing, that Putin isn't popular with his people and his situation is rocky. And I can tell you that isn't true. He's as sound, if not sounder, than he ever was. A lot sounder, I would suspect, from people in Russia behind Putin than there are behind Biden in America, or indeed Sunak in Britain. Anyway, leaving that one aside again, what's going to happen, and my forecasts so far have been reasonably accurate, except the fact that the mud came, of course, as I said, in the military engagement. The mud was there, it didn't freeze, so consequently the Russian army couldn't move forward at all. But as I've pointed out, the Russian doctrine is to bring the Ukraine army on and kill the army in the field. And of course, the third offensive, that was just going right into the Russian doctrinal situation. Bring them on and degrade their army before you start making your advance. As to the mutiny business, just getting back to that, well, as some of you might have spotted in the Sunday Times, I've been sniffing around the Russian embassy a few weeks ago, enjoying a vodka and a blini to see if I could glean anything. I couldn't glean very much. Incidentally, it does make me a Putin stooge. If the Ukraine army, if the Ukraine embassy want to invite me for vodka and blinis, you can bet your bottom dollar I'll turn up. Leaving again that aside, what is the general reading between the lines? And I think perhaps one of the things that we might take away from that, there is a number of more aggressive army commanders who would like to see a very much more aggressive stand from the main Russian army. They want to go forward, they want to get cracking, they want to finish this war, and they want to move on. And I think that's probably what this is all about. Putin is very cautious, he's very step by step, and he doesn't want to make any mistakes, and I think that's the reason he's moving so slowly. But sooner or later, we're now in July, the Russian army will have to move forward, and I think they'll probably do that extremely effectively. How far they'll move forward, I simply don't know. Nobody knows what their plan is, but there's one thing for sure, is that their plan will come to fruition. Now, we've seen things now, of course, called false flag attacks. We saw that in Syria. We saw things that were instigated by the British Secret Service, MI5, MI6, the CIA, trying to sort of, as it were, bring the national press on side to all hate Assad. Assad's a bad man and all this kind of thing in Syria, and we're trying to establish democracy and all that kind of thing that we've seen. So I'm expecting another false flag attack. We saw the one blowing the pipeline where the CIA and the mainstream media in this country, in America and the West, tried to sort of pretend that the Russians blew up their own pipeline. You couldn't invent this, could you? They blew up their own pipeline. Then we've heard that they blew up their own dam, for which the Crimea needs its water and its electricity supply and all the rest of it, which is in Russian hands, which is now part of Russia. And they blew it up themselves. And of course the Daily Express reader will believe anything and wave their little blue and yellow flags, but of course it's absolute bollocks, isn't it? We know that it's completely wrong. But there's another much more dangerous false flag coming up, and that is the nuclear plant, which is in the Russian zone, as it stands, military zone is unable to remain there. The nuclear plant, which the Ukrainians have been shelling and sending rockets and attacking with rockets now for several months. So that's been quite upfront. But now there is a movement, they're feeding into the mainstream media, feeding into the information that the Russians are going to blow it up. It's in Russian territory, it's got Russian troops on it, maybe they're saying that they've mined it. This is clearly softening up the public for a false flag attack. And then if they do blow it up, it means that the West can escalate the war even further by saying, oh my God, aren't they all terrible people? They've just blown up a nuclear plant. And this is the dying gasp of a failing war, a failing regime. It's interesting that Zelensky now has stopped the election. There's going to be no election in Ukraine. So the Ukrainian people aren't even going to get an opportunity to say, can we stop the war? They're not going to get a vote. Washington has said there's going to be no deals. There's no deals to be had. There's no negotiation on the table. We're not going to do it. So we are in this impasse. And of course, and I mentioned on previous things that the Minsk agreement was perfectly good and it could have worked, and it was abandoned, and Angela Merkel told us it was abandoned so they could cheat and they could rearm and put more money into the military in Ukraine, which the Russians said that they would not accept on their doorstep. Not unreasonably, in my view, any more than America would want the Russian missiles or Chinese missiles in Mexico. But it seems there is only one game in town, and that's what Washington tells us all to do globally. And I think those days are coming to an end. So that's where we are. I think we will see in the next month or so a fairly major Russian advance with conventional arms. I also think that we probably will see a false flag attack, and I hope we don't, on that nuclear plant, which is going to damage everything for miles around. That would be a tragedy. But I can see that what we seem to have now is the NATO situation is like a cornered rat, and nothing is going to be off the table for escalating this war and bringing the world, if you like, into it. And just a word on that. Nuclear, let me tell you about nuclear. Since 1945, 1946, there was one deal between the Soviet Union, the West, the Warsaw Pact countries, and the NATO countries, and that was both sides said, we will never use nuclear weapons first. We will never use them first. Now, under the Bush administration, that was backed off by the West and America. They said, we will probably not use nuclear weapons first, but we reserve the right to do so if we feel that's what we should do. So we reserve that right. And that changed under the Bush era. The Russians have only now just recently started to talk about changing theirs, no nuclear first. Theirs was quite categorical. We will not use any nuclear weapons ever unless the other side does, and it threatens the nation state. So that's where we are at the moment, a very dangerous situation, and we've got to get around a table and talk about peace. We've got to have a peace deal. It's in everybody's interest. This war is unnecessary. It's stupid. It's broadly been going on since 2014. Didn't start 2 years ago. It started in 2014 when the The whole concept of the West and NATO wanted to destabilize Russia and destroy the Russian Federation and have a regime change. That's what this war is all about, people. It's a regime change. It's not working. It's turned into a disaster. For goodness sakes, let's step back from the abyss and negotiate some peace before any more innocent lives are killed. And when I say innocent, I mean young soldiers as well, not just civilians. Stop it, and stop it now. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based. And I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.